Serious, retired soldiers on Reddit, what was something that you saw or experienced that you never shared with anyone? Made a throwaway for this. I've never been able to tell my loved ones about this. Sometimes you want to spare them the knowledge of just how much darkness there is inside of you. I'm not sure how I feel about telling complete strangers either. But it's been burning a hole inside of me for some time now. I made the mistake of falling in love with a fellow Marine. We kept it a secret. Of course. For professional reasons. We deployed together. And still. No one knew. We never touched each other. Made eyes at each other. Or ever did anything that would be inappropriate during the deployment, which was torture in and of itself. A few months into the deployment, we were passing out food, candy, and other supplies to a village. It was part of the whole hearts and minds thing. A little girl walked up to get some candy from the man I was in love with. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was holding a doll that someone had given her, with an IED sewn into it. As soon as she took the candy from his hand, the IED detonated. It blew both of them apart instantly. Injured 3 other people. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. I just remember watching it happen. I don't even remember hearing anything. I think the worst part was picking up the pieces of him afterward. Picking up his arms that had held me but were now in shreds. I don't even know how to describe what it felt like. It's so cliche to say. But a big piece of me died that day. Had a father bring his kid in who had got caught in crossfire. He brought his pillows, his blankets, everything to make him comfortable. We got him off the helicopter and just knew he wasn't going to make it. Bring him to the FST, work on him, he's not coming back. I look over and he just staring at us sobbing. Huge gasping sobs. You don't need to speak a different language to completely see absolute heartache and pain. I'm not a father, but that kept me up a bit. No one should have to bury their children. I've only told my wife, my therapist, and my mother what happened. I'm lucky I had someone there to save my life. But I resent him sometimes. I'm highly medicated for severe depression and anxiety disorder. I have no friends, no job, and some days find it hard to even get out of bed. I might leave the house once a week if I'm lucky. I can't enjoy the 4th of July or New Year's. I feel like I'm less of a human being because of what happened. I know other people cope with it better. I don't, and I hate myself that I can't cope better and be normal. Unfortunately, I feel like my family is paying the price. My respect to all of you have been through a traumatic experiences and are moving along with life. I'm trying every day and will keep trying. Because I don't have an option. I have to use a throwaway. Because I'm disgusted with myself. I pray to God every day that my family never finds out what I did. On patrol in Baghdad, my partner and I encountered a group of men beating a woman in the street. At the time there were many riots breaking out. And we were instructed by our CO not to intervene unless there was a clear and present danger to ourselves. We walked away. I'll never forget her screams. They were pouring scalding water on her face. I wanted to kill them all. But I couldn't. Her skin was coming off. I still see it in my dreams. I'm not a soldier. But my father served 2 tours. He told me I'm the only person he ever told this to. He's a helicopter mechanic. Him and his company often did something the military calls Air Force checks. When they didn't completely understand the manual. It's when you go to one helicopter, see how it's set up, then compare it to another helicopter and see if everything matches up. One day the chopper him and his crew were in charge of, something malfunctioned, and they crashed. And they all died. He said it will always haunt him that he didn't double check the aircraft. That he didn't do something that could save those young men's lives. There was no enemy. No fire. No explosion. Something just malfunctioned and they crashed and died. He only ever brought it up once when we were taking a walk together. And has never spoken of it since. I don't blame him. I saw one of my good friends who was going through an awful domestic issue to be divorced in Iraq strangle a cat just to cope with the issue. He was a nice family guy at one point. And eventually returned to that. He ended up going to jail when he got back because he tried to pull the gun out of an officer's holster. I should have checked him into the psych ward days before that happened. An early morning salvo of 3 rockets blew a tent near my B hut to bits while I was in Afghanistan. I ran over to the Hesco bunker in my sleep. After I had come to a little bit, I was checking what I had with me. This is the part that I've never really shared with anyone else. But I didn't notice for a minute. I only had on my combat shirt, Kevlar, and weapon, and then was completely nude from the waist down. And number 3232. And number 3232. I was porky pigging it while sh*t was blowing up around us. It's all I could think about. I felt really awkward about it. Even though I've seen and been seen naked by everyone there. I think I just really didn't want to be caught up in a fight without pants. It was racing through my mind. If there's a perimeter breach, I need to get to my Foot Locker first and get some pants on. I was rehearsing it in my mind. Haha. Luckily the laundry tent took the brunt of the attack. But that really put us back on clean clothes for a bit. Convoy was stopped in some dirt village. Sun was starting to go down. All the kids and females went into the building about 15 yards to my left. Bunch of pickups came into the village full of military age males who then went into the fields, pulled up long boxes and broke into groups, then scattered around various covers and buildings with said boxes. Gee. I wonder what is about to happen. Man, I'm glad the rules of engagement won't let us do jack sh*t about this. Just as the sun goes down, lo and behold, an ambush from the west with rockets and RPK fire. Gunner is pointed west, to the right, and doing what gunners do at times like this. As the sun sets and twilight turns to dark, full on Star Wars mode is engaged, tracers everywhere. The first component attacked when the sun touched the ground from the west, second wave hit us from the east when the sun disappeared. Guy came out of the building to my left where the rocket kicked open the truck door and put my optics on the guy's chest to see a kid's face, completely terrified kid's face. Don't know if I shot. I know the fire support with a 30mm chain gun did. It blew them away in 4x zoom along with the small building they came out of. Sometimes I wonder about the stories my maternal grandfather, who was drafted at age 17 into Tunisia, must have. They sent him to Stalingrad. All I know is that they told him to take the rifle of the guy he was following should he die, and that his shoes were too small, costing him 2 toes. He was imprisoned in a Siberian mine and says he only survived because elder prisoners fed him, saying at least the kids should be able to one day go home. When he did finally return after 5 years, his own mother didn't recognize him at the door for all the weight he had lost. My little brother once asked him if he had killed anyone. He cried at the dinner table. I haven't had the guts to ask him about the war. He's still alive. Aged 86 now, and I love him dearly. I guess I never really tell anyone anything unless they were directly involved. I'll try to keep them short and sweet. My engineer unit was tasked with clearing a road that had been black status for 7 years. Midway in, we get ambushed by a whole village on both sides. We nearly ran out of cruiser ammo that day. What really gets me about it is that just minutes before it all went down, a mother and her child ran to safety in a nearby building. And to my recollection, there wasn't a single building we didn't hit with either Mark 19 or Polish strikers. We tore that village to pieces when it was over. It doesn't really bother me, but I do wonder how much more harm we did than good. On a lighter note, in basic training, one of my battles was really chafing on his ass. He couldn't quite get the baby powder in his crack. He must have really trusted me because he asked me very discreetly and I obliged. So there I am, shooting baby powder into another guy's ass. I took part in 78 separate attacks from hostile forces around Mosul in 2005. Lots of bad shit. But the one thing I near share is that one time I was in the turret of an M1114 HMMWV behind a M250 machine gun doing convoy security, and I looked in a vehicle as we cruised by and there was a little girl, probably 8, who had a healed up gunshot wound to the face. She was missing an eye. She was smiling broadly at me and waved at me emphatically. I just waved back. That little girl had the weight of the world on her shoulders and was smiling. I've never had a bad day since. There was also a kid that was cut deep to where his thumb was barely hanging onto his hand. I was in the turret again that day and the kid ran alongside the truck making a rapping motion with his hand. I tried to get my first aid pouch open so I could throw him my sterile bandage to wrap up his hand, but the old button, Vietnam era piece of shit, wouldn't come unsnapped. The little dude ran next to us for about a minute while I FK'd with it. Finally I just slipped the Alice clips, tugged it off my vest and tossed the whole thing to him. He was smiling the whole time too and was very happy for the packet. It's like FCK man. We really FK'd up over there. Why couldn't we have done more really good stuff instead of escorting Commander Douchebag and the whole F-King PR team to a school just so they could get some F-King photo ops with the poor kids to put in the newspaper back home? My very first patient in Afghanistan was a 10-month girl. The father brought her to our gate asking for help. We checked her out and she is literally missing all of the skin from shoulder blade to waist on her back left side. Burned to the bone. Dad tells Terp that she tripped and got cut up by gravel. Clearly she is burned. I can smell it still today. I can remember the screech she made. The charred skin I had to remove. And that arsehole just sat in the corner. Nothing I can do to right the situation other than do what I can for her. That single moment definitely set the tempo for the following 9 months. The feeling of not feeling anything after killing someone is crazy. It's not like you're stone cold. No emotion. But think of it as you're a waiter at a restaurant and you serve your customers. You don't think anything of it when it's happening. You just do and carry on. It doesn't hit you until later and you're like, motherfucker, I just did that. The emotion of everything is so bland when it happens but so raw when you take a step back. Whenever you have a buddy that gets killed, yeah, it's scary but it doesn't hit you until later. Every moment in that person's life had led up to that moment. It's concluded. Over. Done. Every first kiss. Every Friday night football game. Every person they ever had any contact or relationship with. Everything they ever said. Every plan they ever had or memory they had created came to a conclusion in a single moment that ended their entire existence. TLDR, life is precious. Don't take it for granted. I served in the military here in Finland, as required by law, and there was this guy who chain smoked a lot and we called him Skorsten, Swedish for chimney. His father had killed his mom and then hung himself while Skorsten was young. Skorsten was always depressed but he got along and we were good friends. Then 5 years after we got out I get a message from an army friend who says that Skorsten had hung himself because his girlfriend had left him for another guy. I've accepted that there was nothing I could have done but it still haunts me. Sometimes when I go out for a smoke I still remember how he would ask me for a cigarette because he had misplaced his own. So I'll light a cigarette for him and place it on the side of the ashtray. That's my way to remember him. Edit. A big thanks to all who replied. You made my day. Hell. You made my week. Close bracket. Joking answer. A shit ton of dicks. Seriously. Infantrymen are like little kids. Always running around butt naked. Serious answer. We were ordered to shoot bayonet any bodies we came across because the militia had a habit of playing possum only to kill coalition troops later. Well. In Iraqi summer heat. After a few days of laying there. The bodies will puff up. They get super bloated and just nasty overall. But you can't always tell. Especially if they're all covered up. Well. When you shoot bayonet kick a bloated body. They tend to pop. And out comes the nastiest smell and a disgusting liquid pus goo. Jesus. Nothing smells that bad. And the goo pus gets all over your boots. Or uniform. Or rifle. Or God help you. Your mouth. Much vomit was spewed forth. Many memories cemented forever. Edit. 9 times out of 10. It was easy to tell they were dead. After being hit with 105mm. 40mm. 25mm. Full stop. 50. 7. 62. 5. 56. Or 9mm rounds. There usually wasn't much left. What was left was also food for the fleet of feral dogs that followed us. So, if we came across an intact body, it was either alive and waiting, or had been passed over by the dogs. Posting this on a throwaway account. Long story short, killed an entire family during the Vietnam War without showing a single emotion. We were insensitive to even the most gut-churning things you could ever imagine. A father, mother, and 2 daughters. Our commander didn't give a shit if it had been nothing but school children in that house. Everyone had to die. They were accused of harboring weapons for the Viet Cong. I have nightmares every night. Whether you volunteered or were drafted. I'm sorry you were put in that situation. I can't even imagine. Reading this thread has been a serious reminder that the cost of war is much greater than the money spent on the soldiers who died. Using a throwaway because I've never told anyone before and I don't think I ever could. On a motorcade patrol in Afghanistan. Our point vehicle struck an IED. My best friend was thrown about 10 yards from the wreckage and impaled through the chest with a piece of metal. His face was blown half off. I'll never forget it. I recognized half of his face, and the other half was charred bone. He died in my arms. About 2 years later, I finally got stateside and went to see his family. They told me he wrote to them every day, and when the letters stopped coming, they knew he was gone. His 5-year-old daughter asked me how her daddy died. I didn't know what to say. There was a dead Iraqi guy on the ground halfway covered with a blanket after we shot him. I saw a pack of smokes in his shirt pocket and I remember reaching in there and taking them so I could hand them out to the guys. I even gave some to the other Iraqi prisoners we were watching at the time. It was one of the weird moments. Thinking about it, how strange would it be if your dead body was laying there and some guy came out and took your pack of smokes out of your shirt pocket? That morning, like most mornings, you put your smokes in your jacket and go out to face the day. You die and then some guy from another country casually takes them from you as you rot in the sun. Weird. I once did the recovery of some guys that had crashed their airplane into a shallow lake. We got their bodies out and put them under the only shade we had. One of those pop-up things. So hopefully they wouldn't stink too bad before they could be carried off. It was hot out, so we also stood under the shade around the bodies. Then food arrived that our captain had ordered up for us, so we stood there and ate our lunch. A few minutes in I realized how weird of a situation this was. These guys an hour earlier had been flying around happy as could be. Now they are dead and I am eating lunch over them like nothing is wrong. But I was hungry and they were dead. Not much else to be done otherwise. A junior officer in my unit beat his wife to death, then nearly decapitated her with a blunt hunting knife. Sharp ones were around. Her son was in the next room over and heard it all. But the officer sent him to school the next day anyway. He was used to hearing his mom get beat up by this and all her previous husbands, so he didn't think anything of it. I had to go in after and catalog all of their possessions. He used a .300 Magnum to kill himself and his brains were in 2 corners of the room. Pieces of his scalp clung to a nearby mirror and skull fragments were in the ceiling. The wall behind their bed looked like a Jackson Pollock painting. One day, I accidentally kicked a piece of his skull with my boot. It was on the floor and I hadn't seen it. At that point, it didn't bother me anymore. I had to call for over 2 weeks for people to come in and clean up the mess. By that point the blood started to ferment and smell sweet. Just so many f-ked up things all wrapped into one. Back in 2004 the first people I killed were a teenage girl and a young man who were in close proximity to each other. The guy was armed but the girl wasn't. But I was on the 240G machine gun. And felt like it was a pretty good chance that I'd get her too if I shot at him. I was right. And I hit them both. What was really weird for me right then was I had this kind of sickening moment of total clarity where I thought I've killed a woman before I've slept with one. I didn't really feel different after. But everything was different. I was 19 at the time. I didn't have that same kind of nothing is different but everything is different sensation again until I actually did lose my virginity. Which was a shitty thing to remember your first time being naked with somebody else. For years, I'd flash to that moment right at the end of sex. It still happens sometimes. Not me, an old coworker. Not even sure if true. Anyways, it's a great story, so I'll tell you all about it. I guess my coworker was leading a patrol in Iraq during what I think he said was the Gulf War. While out on patrol, the guy up top on the gun spotted something quite odd in the binoculars and told them he was seeing the golden arches of McDonald's. Thinking the sun was baking his mind, he told him to come down and take a break. But the gunner insisted he take a look. So he obligated, and sure as hell there they were, as if they were back in the States. Naturally, they plotted out where it was on a map, and to their surprise it was just over the border in Saudi Arabia. Now they were on strict orders not to go into Saudi Arabia. But the men couldn't resist getting their burger on. So he radioed the trucks in his company to convey on the McDonald's. When they got there, I guess no one spoke English, so they ordered by pointing to the pictures and then retreated back to Iraq to have a feast. Needless to say, I guess every man that gorged themselves that day got sick from eating their first junk food in months. To this day I have no idea if the story is true or not. But it's fun to hear and think about how a company of men invaded Saudi Arabia for McDonald's. Suicide bomber blew himself up in a crowded restaurant. 40 people dead instantly. 150 wounded. Due to the fact that it was a civilian matter, we were ordered to let the Iraqis deal with it. They had no ability to in the slightest, and we watched as they bled to death of simple injuries. I remember a child watching me from about 20 feet away as he bled out. I saw a father cradling his son who had taken the full force of the blast and was nothing more than a leaking sack of charred meat. Worse, I saw Iraqis just not care. I lost my faith in that war right there. Not a soldier myself. No. But my grandpa was in Korea for a while. As a tank gunner. He didn't talk about it much. But sometimes he'd just bring it up out of nowhere. One day we're talking about football or some bullshit, and he looks out the window. From his chair in front of the TV. And says that one time. He and his guys were on one side of a deep ravine. And they saw a person in the woods on the other. They knew North Koreans were in the area, so they were going to shoot the person and keep moving. But before they could shoot, the person turns and they see she has a kid riding on her back. She pulls the kid off and threw her off the side of the cliff. Then she jumped after it. He doesn't talk about the war much. Only people that know this are the ones in my unit while I was in Iraq. Out on convoy. I'm the convoy commander. So I'm in a gun truck. Blockading traffic. It's night. Car comes at us at high speed. Gunner shines his spotlight. Flashes it. Then takes his M16 and shoots a bunch of tracers past the car. Dude doesn't stop. I tell him to light his ass up. Now. Dot. 50 calories opens up. Shoots out his engine. Guy finally stops. No kaboom. We go in and find out it's a taxi cab. Driver's foot has been shot off. Passenger is a woman with a baby. Thank the gods they were fine. Never did sort out why he didn't stop. Even after we fired tracers past his car. Same convoy. We got hit by insurgents firing RPGs and machine guns. I called in an airstrike. 7 insurgents taken out. Oldest was 18. Youngest was 14. Still have nightmares about that convoy. My unit came under fire trying to protect a medical facility in Iraq. The insurgents had us surrounded. And we had to choose between taking cover for ourselves or hold position and wait for backup. We held the position. 3 of us took position behind a vehicle and engaged the enemy. We couldn't see who was firing on us. I remember aiming my weapon at their position and pulling my trigger. I was the only one of the 3 of us to walk away from that battle. The 2 men who died next to me were good soldiers. And good men. Both of them were better men than me. I'll never understand why I survived. Later on I discovered that some of the enemy firing on us were children. I never found out whether or not I had killed a kid. At the time I didn't care. Now it kills me. This wasn't me. But my great uncle. He had a journal that this story was kept in, and no one knew it had happened until after he passed away. He was stationed in Vietnam and there was a young girl. Maybe 10 or 11. that always used to spend time with the soldiers. They would give her treats and drinks and stuff like that. One day they were at their base and the girl showed up. This was a little unusual since he usually saw her off base. On this day she was wearing a backpack. My uncle was with his commander while she was coming closer. He was yelling to stop, in fear of what was in the backpack. She got closer and closer, smiling the whole time. The commander ordered my uncle to shoot her. My uncle refused to do it and the commander shot her right in front of him. In the backpack there were colored in pages from a coloring book that she was going to give to the soldiers, along with some other toys. My uncle carried that inside for his whole life. My dad was in Vietnam. He was one of those young punks who had to choose between war and prison, so he thought he'd choose the easy way, and went into the Marines. He was a seriously f-ked up man growing up and probably a sociopath to some degree. That war mentally killed him. He would tell us stories at bedtime when we were still tiny. My mom had to leave him for all of our safety when I was 5. He spent most of my childhood in San Quentin. The story that sticks out most to me isn't any of the ones he told me, but the one my grandma told me when I was an adult. At some point he came back home from 3 years in Vietnam with a full-blown addiction and what can only be severe PTSD. He couldn't function above the level of a 5-year-old mentally for months. So he stayed with his mom and she took care of him. One night after a particularly bad nightmare he told her about the rural Vietnamese girl he dated there. She had a daughter. The Viet Cong took the baby and courted her live in front of the mother. The mother brought him the body and he gave her money for a funeral. I can't confirm if this is true or not, but from what my grandma told me, he certainly believed it to be true. I forgave him for a lot of shit after hearing that. Poor fucker. Iraq. We were called out to go retrieve a downed bird. We jumped into our LMTVs and rushed out to get this aircraft. Along the way we saw a dead animal alongside the road. We didn't think much of it and kept on a trucking. Then it hit. The first blast, then the second one. 2 IEDs were tripwired together in a dead animal. The truck in front of us was hit with the first one. The second one us. Everyone in the front truck was completely filled with nails, broken glass, metal, you name it. But nobody was killed, thank God. 2 of the 3 soldiers lost body parts and we had to retrieve them. The explosive that hit our truck wasn't too strong, so we walked away with a bent bumper and blown tire. But this was a traumatic experience for me being 18 and on my first deployment. I'd never experienced anything like the horror I felt when I saw that first truck get hit. When you're running over to it thinking you have 3 dead friends, brothers that you will have to watch be put into the ground. It's a scary world out there and people do sick things. I was on one of the first teams into Afghanistan in 2001. We were out pretty much on our own the majority of the time we were in country, and had multiple standoffs. I had RPGs pointed at me. Lots of AKs. Not to mention the stink eye from quite a few people. One time, we were given targets by our warlord, and had a bunch of F-18s overhead waiting to drop bombs. We served over 3,000 Afghanis at a makeshift clinic. We helped dispose of a bunch of unexploded ordnance, mortar rounds, artillery rounds, etc. After a truck blew up in town under questionable circumstances. I share a lot of my stories with people, but the thing I rarely share is that we never dropped a bomb. I never fired a shot, and never killed a soul. And the memory that actually sticks with me in slow motion is of having my weapon on fire and having a guy in my sights ready to kill if anything went down. It is weirdly kind of embarrassing that going through all of that I came home with all of my rounds. I may be late, but this isn't my story but my dad's. My dad was in the Air Force during the Vietnam War and was in a crew that was in one of those C-130 Hercules planes that carried supplies and fresh soldiers to front lines deep in the jungle and would bring back the wounded and dead from the front lines. During one supply run with about 100 plus fresh out of boot camp soldiers, he meets some guys that he had grown up with and gone to school with. They chatted it up and talked about meeting after they got back to the States. The plane landed and dropped everything off, picked up some dead soldiers and head back the main airport. About 5 months later my dad and his crew went on a supply drop to a different place and the plane had to take back about 50-70 dead soldiers. While loading he noticed one of the guys he chatted with on the supply drop 5 months ago and asked him how he was doing. The guy was obviously shaken up according to my dad. The guy then said that the unit he was in was ambushed. Only 2 guys made it out. None of the guys my dad grew up with made it out. My dad had to load the bodies of the 3 guys he had just talked to 5 months ago.